Hello and welcome everyone to another live presentation of Sumer Daily. I'm your host, Sam Brookhouse, joined again another Sunday, Lindsay, that you're joining me. Thank you so much. And this time it was for an Eagles-Rams game that I was really excited for coming in, and it just ended up the same way that a lot of these Eagles games have gone this year, where the Eagles literally run away with it. What were your, opening thoughts on this game?
It didn't play out the way that I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be a close game. Not at all surprised that the Eagles won, but I thought that the Rams were going to keep it a little bit closer. I thought that the Rams defense was I guess they held Jalen Hurts to 179 passing yards, but it's hard to give them too many flowers when they give up 255 on the ground to Saquon. What? I expected Saquon to get probably, in the range of 100 rushing yards. This was within my range of expectations for him to have another Saquon week, but I wasn't expecting what we ultimately saw from him on the ground against this defense.
Yeah, and it's really so fascinating, right? Because I had highlighted coming into this game, that the Eagles defense was very good on the early downs at stopping teams, and the Rams offense was very good on the early downs at, moving the ball. And that's pretty much how it turned out. The first quarter or so, first two quarters of, the Rams being able to move the ball against their defense. And then on the flip side, obviously that offensive line of the Eagles kind of dominating, getting charged up. And then it kind of flipped in the second half. That defense really started to dominate. And of course, the offensive line showed up in an absolutely massive way. The last touchdown, I think they had already probably cleared the game, but Lindsay, I'm not at my 4-5 days anymore. I'm probably more 4-9 nowadays, but I think I probably could have scored on that one. The hole was massive. The play
kind of
calling
like
was
Melissa
awesome.
Stark could score on the tush push.
That's also true. I think many people could, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's just this team is just clicking right now, and it's so interesting to compare the team at this point, whatever going into week 12 at this point, compared to last year going into week 12, because I think they have the same record. I remember they had 2 losses, and then they just dropped everything going in to the last final weeks going into the playoffs. And it's a completely different feel than last year, despite, kind of the same story, really.
Yeah, the vibes for the Eagles are very, very different than they were last year, because last year started off so strong.
Right.
And then it just kind of hit like a rough patch, and they were never able to get it settled. And it kind of felt like the wheels were falling off, and it was the car breaking down the stretch, for reasons that in a lot of ways, I think a lot of us had a hard time putting our finger on exactly what was going on. And this feels like almost the opposite. I feel like they were a little bit snuck up on us, and it was kind of, they were a team that we didn't talk about that much at the start of the season. And then here they are. And I feel like they're kind of, they're catching their wind at the right time of the season this year, which I think is, that's what you're looking for, right? To be rounding into shape at this time of year. And they're looking like a team, looking ahead to the postseason, what is their hole? What is the biggest deficiency that they have that you would maybe point to and say this is going to be a problem for them in the postseason?
Yeah, it's really tough to say. And this run of games that they've had is reminding me a lot of the Ravens run that they had, where Henry was getting, those massive yardage totals and lots of touchdowns. But the hole was very clear for the Ravens. It was the defense, especially as now, they go into a matchup, Eagles versus Ravens.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't feel like the Eagles have that deficiency. The Rams were clicking on offense. I think that for most of the game, Sean McVay was calling a brilliant game, even scheming away. Once in the second quarter, they started having offensive line troubles. McVay schemed away from it. And of course, they come out, first 4 drives, they give up 2 touchdowns in the second half, but then they also go down for a touchdown and then, drive right down the field as well. Some weird penalties, a declining of a penalty where they were going to go for it on 4th, which was a little weird. But that I like definitely agree with you. Like, I don't really know where the hole on this team is. And as we move into our little live haters and appreciators segment, the only one I can identify right now is just due to injury. It's just that they do not have, a third option at the wide receiver pass catching position right now. I think AJ Brown is incredible. I think
Mhm.
Goddard is also a suitable tight end.
Yep.
But I think going into a better matchup, I think that could cause serious problems for them.
Yeah, when you look at the box score from tonight's game, you've got AJ Brown with 109 of the 179 passing yards that they had in this game, and then Saquon with 47 next on the list. Goddard next with 19, and then so we haven't even said the second wide receiver here. I mean, obviously
Right.
Devontae missing is huge for them, but to
Mhm.
your point, you're looking at like Dotson and Calcaterra and Wilson. And there were 3 targets between the 3 of them. So, yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think if Devontae can get healthy, then that kind of, helps out certainly a lot in that department. Um, yeah, really, really just fascinating game there that Saquon ran the ball more than Jalen threw it. That's obviously been something that we've seen a lot more with the Eagles this year. It just in terms of like the pass rate, run rate, they're a run heavy team. And luckily in the last few weeks, they've put themselves in a position to be that by jumping out to a lead and having a positive script where they can hand the ball to Saquon Barkley, which takes me to what is clearly going to be the biggest theme coming off of this game, which is
Mhm.
going to be a conversation about Saquon. And again, the fingers being pointed at the Giants and how they were so stupid for letting him go. And then we're going to also have a analytics people are stupid, running backs do matter and you should pay them. And Saquon's a perfect example of that. And don't you dare let him go. And then also there's going to be another conversation. Like there's just layers that are going to come
Right.
off of this Saquon performance. And another one is going to be whether or not he deserves to be the MVP. And there's just so many layers to this that I think are really interesting football conversations, because I think that what I just said there about the run rate, for example,
Mhm.
is the perfect example of like why, and I've said this so many times, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the subject matter too, standing where we stand right now with the
Mhm.
Giants having already moved on from Daniel Jones and, they're a disaster. Um, Barkley this year, I maintain we would not be seeing this from him if he
Right.
was on the Giants, because the Giants have so many other flaws. And I think when you are not a team, I think that a running back like him is a luxury to have. And obviously, when you have all of the pieces around you that
Mhm.
he is fortunate enough to have with the Eagles, when you have an offensive line that is the kind of offensive line that you just described, this is one of the things that we wanted to see coming into this game was this
Mhm.
young, talented Rams defensive line going up against the veteran, very strong offensive line of the Eagles. And we obviously saw who won out there. He's running behind them. That's not what was in New York. And so now you're getting the best version of Saquon. And obviously he's talented, but from a numbers game standpoint, we weren't seeing that in New York. And I maintain that we would not have seen that in New York. Last year, his rush EPA per attempt ranked 46th in the league. It
Right.
was negative. His yards per carry was 3.9. That ranked 32nd. It was the exact same as Deontay Foreman and Alexander Madison.
Right.
They ranked 30th in scoring. And this is actually the point that I wanted to make, because obviously all of those advanced numbers for him and even yards per carry and all of it is way, way, way more this year. Like this is a
Right.
career year for him by in every way that it possibly could be. This year, this team came into this game, the Eagles, averaging 25.9 points per game. That is 10 more points per game than the Giants averaged last year. They ranked 30th in scoring and averaged 15.6. They are averaging 15.8 this year, worst in the league. I don't think he would have changed that. And because I don't think he would have changed that, even though he's so much, he's very, very good, Tyron Tracy's averaging more yards per carry this year for the Giants than Saquon did last year. In the first 11 weeks, the Eagles led for 260 snaps. The Giants had 228 leading snaps all of last season, they threw 57% of the time. They've thrown 58% of the time this year. The Eagles this season, coming into this game, had the lowest pass rate in the league at 44.8%. All of this creates an environment where you can hand Saquon the ball because you're playing with a lead. And now you are putting him in a position where he can have the success that we're seeing from him. And so I think it's hard for me to buy an MVP argument, knowing that there's so much around you that has to be good in order for this to come out, which is not a statement about like him not being good. Obviously, there's so much value to Saquon Barkley, but like in the most valuable debate, it's just tough for me to tilt towards the running back because I know what it looked like last year when everything around him was bad, and we have a really hard time seeing the value come to the surface. And not just last year, his entire Giants career. Obviously, there are flashes of that talent, but we're seeing a career year from a running back. How many years in are we? Like, he's getting older. Like, clearly he had this in him back then.
Exactly.
But he couldn't add that value because the environment didn't allow him to, which is the running back argument. That's like, I think he's actually in some ways strengthening what we're talking about here.
Right.
Not hurting it.
Right. It's almost like, I think you did a fantastic job of breaking down the metrics, because it almost feels like a game-wide problem, a league-wide problem at this point. And the way that I discuss it, in the academic research or whatever, they call it the loser's curse of like having to draft first or second because you have to pay a lot for these guys that may or may not do well. And I think in a certain degree, there's also a loser's curse surrounding these running backs because they are the best player on your team. They do raise your floor to a certain degree, I guess. Like, you're getting some offensive production, certainly, but like, you cannot support them in a way that the Ravens or the Eagles can support them. And it just doesn't fit in the same. And so when you are a losing team, it's so difficult to go and spend that money, which again, like, it is a depressed market. They're not going to spend $45 million a year on Saquon Barkley anyway. I think he's making like 8 to 11 or something like that, with like some bonuses and stuff like that with the Eagles. It's so tough for me to really break down the decision-making this year for the Giants, because I just think it's untenable. And they were able to pick up Tyrone Tracy kind of like off the, late round heap.
Like free. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a good player. And if that becomes a good team in the next, 2-3 years, like, that's going to make a huge difference. And so you like try to delve deeper. You look at the skill positions, like they add Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors last couple of weeks has had hard weeks, both for him and the entire offense. Obviously now Tommy DeVito's there. Hard day in the locker room. You can tell just by his press conferences today. Like, he's really not making he's had a fantastic year. He's breaking literally like analytics tracking scores. He's doing fantastic. I almost put him on our all pro list because he's like literally the one bright spot on that Giants offense. And he's such a bright star in how much his usage is, not today again, but like early on in the season, in what he's doing in the tracking metrics and how he's contributing, his ability to make plays. And it literally has made zero difference.
Yep.
And so you take another step back and you're like, okay, if that player is not making any difference, should they have, like, there was so much talk going in about, are they interested in Drake May? Are they interested in JJ McCarthy? Heck, now that we've seen Bo Nix on the field, like, could they have taken Bo Nix at that slot? Which, I wouldn't have advised of at the time, but let's just consider it for, discussion's sake.
Mm-hmm.
You add in, let's just say on average, quarterback 20, quarterback 15, like high range. Would that have made a difference if Saquon Barkley's in there? Like, I don't even know. It's so difficult to compare the Eagles, who, as we spoke about, like last year, all the tools were there. They won a ton of games early on in the season. It all kind of fell apart. Like, it seemed like more cultural issues, or maybe like some missed links between the offense coordinator at the time and Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. And it's just clicked in a way this year. But it comes back to that offensive line. Like, discussing this with a lot of people, I never want to forget, like, Arian Foster in a Kyle Shanahan offense was a like virtual lock as an all-pro. And DeMarco Murray ran for 1,700 yards
with a
offensive line that was absolutely elite on a similar level of, the Detroit Lions or the Philadelphia Eagles this year. And then like 2 years later, who knows? I think Saquon's in a different class, but it's so tough to try to make that call. And what makes it even tougher is like you look at the NFC East, like blood rivals, obviously. But at the same time, like you're only playing them twice a year. It's not going to make like that big of a difference in any given year. Let's say Saquon has 2 or 3 more good years. Like it'll hurt the heart certainly, and it'll hurt when the New York Post is writing articles about it. But like you got to figure out a way to build your team, and I'm sticking on it as I think you are as well.
Yeah.
Of it just did not make sense to keep Saquon in a Giants jersey. And yes, it sucks to watch him light it up and be one of the best weapons now on a team with the Eagles. But you go look at some of Swift's numbers from last year. He's putting up 130, 140-yard games. You go back and look at Miles Sanders, who is now what? I think he's injured, but regardless, Chuba Hubbard took his spot.
Yeah.
And then he ended up being like running back 3 2 years later. And he's younger. And he was running for I think he ran for 1,200 yards in an Eagles jersey. Like they've invested in the offensive line position. They've invested in this strategy of we're going to pick up the best guy we can find or a cost efficient guy in any given year at the running back position. I think the Eagles probably would have even made the same decision. Would you agree?
I mean, I do. And I think Chuba Hubbard's an interesting name to bring up here because he's playing very well. And he is one of those like rare examples of a running back that is exceeding expectations in an otherwise bad offense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that you see all that frequently. Like in the fantasy space, people are, he's kind of an enigma because usually you have to move off of the running back that is in an offense that's expected to get blown out every week because, and he is kind of the anomaly in that sense. I mean, he's 10th in rush EPA this season. Like he's interesting. It's not mattering. Like all of the advanced numbers, he's having success. I mean, not even advanced yards per carry. We're looking at 5.1 a pop for him. Like that's great. It doesn't matter. They're not winning games. What they need to win games is for that. That's nice. Please continue. But that's not enough to get us a dub. You need Bryce Young to improve. You need the passing game to start clicking. And I think it's just, I mean, this gets into, more of a mathematical conversation just about but I mean, in the most basic sense, a good passing yards per play is very different than a good rushing yards per play. And so just in terms of mere math, like in an understandable sense, like if your best running back is going to average 6 yards a carry and your best pass, and that's an average passing attack, or maybe even a little bit below average. Like you need, looking at Daniel Jones, for instance, this year, and what they're able to do with their passing attack. I think that the passing yards per play for the Giants this year is like 5. So if you're averaging that, just looking at Saquon inserted into that offense, how many times are you earning a second series or, converting on a first down and giving him more opportunities? Like you can't get that score up because the rushing opportunities just aren't going to be great enough for him to make a difference. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to build a team that can win games. So while it's obviously nice to have this type of piece, I have argued for the last few weeks that I think that the Giants not only did the right thing for them, though they are, like a lot of things have gone wrong for them in a number of different ways, but I think they did the right thing for all of us. And I don't think that was their goal, but we would never have seen this from Saquon. And I think more than anything, I'm grateful that we're finally seeing it. We're seeing what he can do in an environment like this.
Yeah, exactly. They're peaking at the right time. And I think this is going to be an interesting conversation as they face the Ravens next week and as they move into the playoffs. Because if Devontae Smith continues being injured, if A.J. Brown goes down, they're going to have that secondary receiver problem that Eric Eager laid out, all those years ago, where it really matters the receiving position, especially as you get into the playoffs. Maybe we'll be like, relapsing on this conversation yet again if the Eagles take a tough playoff loss because they just the run game, is a moderately successful in a game, maybe above average GPA. They just can't get it done in the passing game because they don't have the weapons outside, even though AJ Brown is an all-world wide receiver. But speaking of like the guys that they have added,
Yeah.
man, they hit on Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, and I mean the drama coming into this game was Sean McVay versus Vic Fangio again, like two of the biggest brains probably in football history at this point. And I thought Sean McVay like had a lot of the answers, but when the defensive front started playing well, and then Quinyon and Cooper started playing well, it was like it was over with, and Fangio wins again. And like again, two excellent additions by the Eagles. They played really well.
Yeah, Quinyon last week, I think that was a really big week for him against Terry McLaurin to kind of pop, because I think a lot of football fans tend to focus on the offensive players. I think a lot of us do that. And so maybe Quinyon hadn't really gained the exposure that he was deserving of outside of Philadelphia. And then when you have a game like Terry McLaurin had, then people are going, what, why? And then Quinyon Mitchell's name comes up. And then that circles back to the fact that Terry McLaurin's locked down on the left side. So you can line up against him every single time if you're a Quinyon Mitchell and know that that's where he's going to be. I can't not rant about Terry McLaurin. His usage again. Like, this is just this week, and I know we're sticking to Sunday Night Football for now, but it's just I don't understand it, and I have now reached the point where I am past the I'm going to rant about Terry McLaurin's usage. He lined up on the left side this week. What were the numbers? It was 43 of 57 snaps, so a 75% clip, and not just the left side, like left wide receiver, like in the exact same spot, 75% of the snaps. I've now moved past the anger about this, and now I just need to fully understand it. I need literally, like, I would like time with Cliff Kingsbury or somebody who could explain what it is. Like, because I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that there is a thought process that goes to this. Like, there is it's not just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. What? He's there all the time. Like, this is purposeful, and there must be a thought attached to it. And I need to understand it, because I just don't. But that's a sidebar.
Yeah. And Cliff Kingsbury obviously comes from the Mike Leach tree, and the overarching thought process in that, spread / air raid offense is like, let's make everything as simple as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And so like when I would go play UCF, right, and Josh Heupel would be coaching them, we knew where everyone was going to line up. And moreover, we knew that they were going to line up in unorthodox positions, particularly like the wide receivers would be a lot closer to the, past the numbers, closer to the sideline and stuff like that. But they'd generally be in the same position. But the reason they do that is because they'd be going fast, because they would be signaling in, because they didn't have stuff in their headphones. Like, that's not happening at the NFL level. And in this Sunday Night Football game, like, you see the benefit of lining your guy up outside the numbers, you lining him inside the numbers, lining him up in line, motioning him everywhere. I mean, how many times do we see Puka Nacua? I think it was like everywhere. 4 or 5 times where they're motioning him across the set. They get that little, play action sprint out, and they hit him. And it's almost like an automatic first down, particularly when you're facing those big, huge defensive linemen that Vic Fangio likes to show. And like, how can you see that from a guy like Puka, who is, a bigger guy? Like, watching him is almost like watching George Kittle at this point. The way he blocks, the way he's hard to tackle, the way his physicality, even at the catch point. But like, you bring up a great point, because, Terry McLaurin playing whatever 4 or 5 snaps at a time in the same position, and Puka Nacua is out here blocking, motioning, and he's open because of that, and he's able to make these fantastic plays, obviously because of his play strength and his play speed, etc., but also because they're putting him in an awesome position to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was more than anything, I was surprised that it worked for the first half of the season. I think the fact that, I don't know why the Commanders have started struggling more on offense. I don't know that that's the answer. I don't know that defenses are figuring them out. I don't know if Jaden Daniels, he ran the ball a lot today. So, there was some talk in the last couple of weeks about whether the rib injury was a problem. His rushing numbers were down. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you, because if I said, oh, defenses have figured this out, now they have X number of weeks of you doing the exact same thing all the time. But I would have said that from like week 2, right? Like, I mean, it's like and we could have even anticipated it coming in week 1. Like, if I was just to take a guess as a defensive coordinator about what Cliff Kingsbury was going to do, about where people were going to be and how frequently they were going to be there, I would have guessed exactly that. Terry McLaurin left side lockdown, because that's what he's done historically throughout his career. So I don't know. I guess it makes sense to a degree that maybe the simplification might work with a rookie quarterback, right? Like, that you could see that, okay, we're not going to make you think in that way. You're looking for some things, but we're not going to overcomplicate the offense out of the gate for Jaden Daniels. And then he was able to have success in that sense. But I don't know, man. They're perplexing to me. But going back to tonight's game, that's one of the things that we all love about the Rams offense the most. And I will say this, as much as the Eagles were the story tonight, there was a stat I found earlier in the week for fantasy purposes that the Rams, the Eagles defense had only allowed Jamar Chase to rank in the top 40 at wide receiver versus the Eagles defense. That's insane, to not allow another wide receiver in the top 40. I didn't go back and actually double check that stat, and I probably should have now that I'm saying it, because it sounds very unbelievable. My expectation coming into this was that both of those wide receivers would, and they ultimately did. And they didn't even need that last the Cooper Kupp touchdown at the end didn't even contribute to that specific fact. But yeah, and I will say, going to the haters appreciators, because normally there's more structure here than when I come in and I take over and I start rambling. In terms of appreciators, one of my favorite moments of the game was a Rams moment, and that was Matthew Stafford with his gunslinger mentality, firing that ball to Puka Nacua on the right sideline.
Right.
That one in the third quarter in like the tightest of windows. There are just moments when you're watching Matthew Stafford play when you're like, oh, that's why everybody says that he's your favorite quarterback's favorite quarterback. Like, that was one of those moments for me.
Yeah, and it's so funny because we're gonna look back at this game and the biggest struggle, I think, was the Rams offensive line, which McVay schemed away from, like, as the game went on. But you can only scheme away it so, like, once a team's up plus 14 or plus 17 or whatever. But, like, the offense is still there, and to kind of, like, focus it elsewhere, no one wants to win the NFC West. It's very clear. The Seahawks and Cardinals play a gnarly game. Like, the poor 49ers can't, keep anyone healthy. They get blasted by the Packers. And, like, I said 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was on your show, Lindsay, that I was like, I just believe in the Rams because they have guys like Matthew Stafford, your favorite quarterback's favorite quarterback. They have Puka Nacua. Like, they have guys that I like. And then on defense, like, very rough game for them, obviously, on defense, particularly in the run game. I think the DBs got exposed a little bit, particularly when they were lined up one-on-one with A.J. Brown. I think A.J. Brown, had an excellent curl route, and then he breaks the tackle. Like, that's why A.J. Brown's one of the best guys in the league, but they just don't have a guy who can finish there. But, like, they still have these little, like, shows on the defensive line. Jared Verse just blowing up Jordan Mailata. Jared Verse having an excellent year. But, like, who wants to win the NFC West, Lindsay? Like, what's going on here? Like, the Cardinals maybe have it. I do not think so. I'm still putting my trust in the Rams the most. The Seahawks I like a little bit better. The 49ers, I think, are just so injured I can't trust. I don't even know what to think at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Niners were healthy, if they could somehow pull that off, which feels very out of reach right now, but if they were to do that, then I think that they're the obvious choice here, because I think that they have top to bottom the best roster. Outside of that, I was high on the Cardinals coming into this week, and then that was a disappointing one for them today against Seattle. I don't know. Seattle's been like a weird team this year, where I feel like there's nothing that they do that's particularly exciting or impressive. Like, they don't stand out in any particular way, and yet there they are at the top of the division. I mean, tied, and in a very unimpressive manner. I kind of agree with you that, like, I think that the Rams The Rams, I think I'm still feeling them. They have a win in hand against the Niners. They have a win in hand against the Seahawks. They lost to Arizona. So that's the one
Mhm.
that I think that they're the most worried about in terms of like being able to control their destiny. And then they have games against the other, all three of them still left down the stretch. They have a tough one against the Bills, but other than that, I think that, the Jets and the Saints are certainly winnable games for them. So I think that that's probably a team that I'm still keeping my eye on, but this was a damaging loss.
Yeah, and I've tried to pick up stuff about the Seahawks. I think Mike McDonald's doing a great job with that defense. I will note, and they've gotten better week over week. I I was very, questioning them after the 49ers, the Thursday night football 49ers loss, weeks ago. And now they're in a spot where, a Cardinals run game that has been doing very well, a Cardinals offense that's been doing well, period. They just absolutely shut down.
Uh-huh.
And so, maybe I believe in their defense a little bit. They have guys that are playing well. I think Geno like separates them a little bit maybe from the pack, particularly like Brandon Allen is playing for the 49ers
God.
moving forward. But it's a tough one. Like, this is such an interesting division because they have 4 coaches that I think are performing at a pretty good level. They have defenses that are, questionable at best. 49ers have a lot of defensive injuries. I don't think Nick Bosa played today. You look at the Seahawks, like their defense has been up and down all year. Geno has been up and down all year. I've been trying to pick up on patterns. At first, I was like, maybe he just doesn't play well outside, but he's played a little bit better at home. Like who knows with them? But it's just really fun to analyze because I think when you're in a situation where you have 2 excellent, like borderline Hall of Fame level coaches, like
Mhm.
2 young up and coming defensive coaches, and a lot of talent overall, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because I think, frankly, like 49ers get healthy, Rams hit a stride, that defense under Mike McDonald starts hitting a stride. I think they could probably make noise in the playoffs in the NFC.
Whichever team comes out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think that the NFC is it's so circumstantial. It's so
Mm-hmm.
circumstantial as to like if any of those things happen and the degree to which those things happen. Because I mean, if they run into Detroit early, then you know that's a tough draw. The NFC South is just a black hole. I guess you could make that argument about the NFC West, but I feel more optimistic about an
Right.
NFC West team potentially, whichever one it ends up being. Which is,
Right.
again, these are weird sentences that we're stringing together here, but
Mm-hmm.
whichever one it ends up being, I have more faith that they will have risen to the top for a reason, and then that reason will be why they can go on a run and be a team that nobody wants to play in the postseason. I don't feel that way. I feel like whoever comes out of the NFC South is probably going to limp into it. Because Tampa Bay is the team that I actually like the most in that division, but it's only the offense. The defense is just incredibly
Right.
terrible. But I really like the offense, and I really like Baker, and I love what Baker has done this year. He's been one of my favorite parts of the season so far. The fact that Baker is having the success that he is. What was his completion percentage today? Like 80%?
Mm-hmm.
And he did it, for a handful of weeks without Mike Evans and without Godwin, and we're just like stringing things together. And then the Bucky Irving emergence and the fact that they
Mm-hmm.
have him and Rashad White in the backfield. I could go on and on about the offense and how I think that they could definitely make some noise in the postseason up against a defense, but then unfortunately, their defense is one that it would have to be a high scoring game.
Right. Yeah,
They would have to.
and sticking with the NFC South, like I wrote about it last week in my hot sauce hot takes, so it was like a little bit more out there, but like the Saints are kind of hitting their stride. The Panthers all of a sudden like have had 3 straight games where they look good. The defense didn't look
Panthers
great
do
as
look
it had.
better. They're not
I
going
love it.
anywhere, but I'm
My
enjoying watching them kind of turn things around.
Yeah, yeah. As we move into like our favorite moments of the weekend to close it out here, like my favorite moment of the weekend is like Dave Canales clearly has like the same plan that Dan Campbell had, where like the Lions look very, very rough at first when Dan Campbell came in, and then all of a sudden they start getting these weird wins and these weird games that turn out in ways where we're like, wait, Bryce Young played really well in that game, or Jared Goff, like back in the day, like played really well in that game. Like, what is going on here? Like, is this team building? Like, still have like a blatant flaw on defense, but like this is like their third, depending on how you like really mark it down, like to fifth straight game where it's like, okay, I'm seeing the outline. Like we're going to establish the run. Chuba Hubbard's going to play well.
Yeah.
Bryce Young isn't going to make mistakes, and Bryce Young's starting to look accurate. I like the way that he was making plays out of the pocket. He looked a little bit more like Bama Bryce Young. He looks comfortable now. They have two, relatively good tackles, one of which who is very young. They were able to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes. They sacked him like 5 or 6 times. Like the sprinkles on the cupcake are starting to get dropped. It's just like a little too early. The cupcake's not done yet. I don't know. But so that was my favorite moment of the football weekend. Lindsay, what was your
Carolina
favorite moment of the football weekend? Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. Mine was similar in tone, in terms of a turnaround, and it was about Caleb. Specifically, I guess in that game, both quarterbacks for very different reasons.
Right.
And yes, I'm a USC alumnus, and that is not necessarily why I liked watching.
Oh, we love it over
those
here.
guys.
No, Lindsay, we're all fans over here. You can be an analyst, you can put on a fan. We can all do it. We can all do it.
But also, I don't think that that's why. It's I think that both of those guys, there are reasons to root for them outside of that, right? Like the Sam Darnold comeback story this year has been fun for a lot of people to follow, I think, regardless of whether you feel invested in him from prior to his time in the NFL. But Caleb, I really, really liked. And I know that the Bears found other ways to, not win the game, and that it's like their Bears fans feel like their heart's getting ripped out on a weekly basis, and that it's just a sea of sadness right now.
Right.
That's its own thing. I think the one thing that I loved seeing this week was an established pattern of momentum for the offense, but specifically for Caleb, because I think there was so much confusion for me about the way that the offense looked out of the gate, and the fact that he looked so out of sorts and not comfortable. And having watched him in college, I was just really confused because it didn't necessarily feel like, oh, we're just having trouble adapting to the NFL. Like he didn't look like himself at all, at all in any way. And so
exactly
the fact that he's able to now put 2 games together and had 340 passing yards today against a good defense in Minnesota, right? 32 for 47, 2 touchdowns. He had a throw in the first where he was flushed out of the pocket running right, made a throw along the right sideline that looked like one of those like Game of Thrones superhero, like I'm throwing the sword or the javelin or whatever in midair, like no platform, obviously, but like that's what I was used to seeing from him in college, was him just finding his body in sorts of weird angles and still firing the throw. And I was like, that's Caleb right there. And then to hear his teammates after the game talking about his confidence being different and his ability to handle the blitz and all that kind of stuff. I'm just happy that they made the change at offensive coordinator, that we're seeing we're reaping the returns of that. And that Bears fans, at the very least, in the midst of all of your sadness, you get to go, we did get a quarterback. We did get our guy. This is actually part of the sad story. This man has already set the Bears rookie franchise record. What? For passing. What? Like, how is that even a possible stat when it's been a bad year for him and it's week 12 and this is the best that we've seen from a rookie in that franchise's history? Ugh. But then also in that game on the other side, Sam Darnold and all the stories that came out of the locker room afterward, with everyone specifically talking about him and the fact that he was so tough and the way he kind of like grounded them in the huddle in overtime and down the stretch and kept them really calm and grounded. And we got to see his veteran status and all of that experience come in handy. And I think that's been a big part of his storyline this season. And I was happy to see both of them have success in different ways.
Yeah. And talking about loving Bryce looking like Alabama Bryce, I've had to watch Caleb play my lovely Tulane Green Wave, and the whole shtick of him coming into the draft was like, okay, I know Jaden Daniels can make the throws, but Jaden Daniels scares me with his legs. And we really have seen one quarterback out of, the past decade who really scares you with his legs, and that's Lamar Jackson, who's a double-time MVP. Like, you just can't expect that from Jaden. And frankly, like, he's lived pretty much as close to that as possible, but the difference maker for him has been the perimeter throws. The thing that's I loved about Caleb was like he legitimately scares me. His ability to extend plays, his
Yes.
abilities to play create, and his ability to throw the ball even from within the pocket.
Yeah.
And it was apparent early that it was like, oh, that like he's making scary plays. He's making scary Caleb Williams plays. And
Yep.
not only that, but he then went on to make, oh, he's just gonna like break the pocket and stand there for 25 minutes and pick you apart.
Yep.
And there's nothing you can do about it. And that's an absolute great sign. And like talking about the NFC, obviously they're probably out of it because they're cursed, as the Bears generally are. But like good sign, but like I don't really trust any teams at this point other than the Lions. And I guess I trust the Eagles at this point too, now that their defense looks so good.
Yeah.
And I guess I trust the Packers. Like they looked good as well. The Vikings, I tend to trust as well. But like it's such an like those are really the only teams I trust. 3 of them are in the NFC North. The Packers did not look good against the Lions. Weird game in the rain, but like I think it showed a lot. And I still am like iffy on the Vikings like back end.
Me too.
But it's just such a toss up this year, and it's going to be a fascinating playoffs, particularly because everyone has a flaw, I think, except for the Eagles and the Lions at this point.
Yeah. It is getting, and we're also getting to a point where I think it's becoming more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Like a handful of weeks ago, I think that the teams that you just named, there would have been more teams in that conversation of teams that you felt strongly about. Like Minnesota, obviously, I mean, several weeks ago would have been a team that I would have sort of banged the table for at that stage of the season. And
Right.
I feel less confident now about Minnesota than I did earlier in the season. And it feels a little bit like Detroit and Philadelphia are kind of running away with it in the NFC. That's not to say that anything can happen in the
Mm-hmm.
postseason. And like we've said, there are teams that can pick you apart in some ways, and maybe they're not perfect from top to bottom or both sides of the ball or all 3 phases or whatever. But they have ways that they can beat you. And then in the AFC, I'm really excited to watch Los Angeles and Baltimore
Oh
tomorrow
yeah,
night.
it's going to be fantastic.
Like
It's going to
back
tell
to
us a lot.
back primetime Chargers games. I don't know if my heart can take it, because you know that there's going to be some sort of lead involved, and
Right.
then it's going to get tight, and how's it going to end? It'll be fascinating.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And we will be back tomorrow breaking that down with Sean Syed. And then on Tuesday, you can check out Lindsay on the SumerSports Show, which I think me and Sean will be joining this week. So we'll have
Yeah.
another powwow breaking down all the cool stuff from Monday night, all the cool stuff from the week. And we'll probably have some other shenanigans as well pre-Thanksgiving. But Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me on this late night, I guess Central Time, now Monday morning.
Oh man, is it really? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, all good, all good. Always lovely to talk to you. So signing off from Sumer Sports, she's Lindsay Rhodes. I'm Sam Brookhouse. Thank you for tuning in.